My name is Megan Carter. I am 32 years old. 11 months ago, my husband confessed he had been treating me as a temporary distraction while he kept his ex in the picture to close a major merger for his family's dealership business. Now in the emergency room of Atlanta General Hospital after fainting from his constant pressure, my husband leaned in and said quietly that if I didn't quit my job to support him better, he would tell everyone I was too unstable for a real partnership. But lying there, I knew I had to stop letting him dictate my life, or I would lose everything that made me me, and I was ready to fight for my future. If you've ever had your husband use guilt to control your choices and make you feel less, then drop a comment below with what you would do in my shoes, or tell me where you're watching from. It really means a lot to hear from all of you. Let me take you back to how it all started. I met my husband at a busy coffee shop in Atlanta one afternoon 11 months ago. He asked what I did for work, and I told him I was in tech. He nodded like he understood and filled in the blanks himself, assuming I handled scheduling or basic support for executives. I smiled and let the assumption stand, because my grandmother had drilled into me that a person's real character only shows when they think you have nothing to offer them. I was actually a senior software architect earning $58,000 a month before taxes with 4 patents and stock options that could have paid cash for a house. But I lived simply in a modest 2-bedroom apartment and drove a 15-year-old sedan because that was the life I chose after my grandmother passed and left me everything she had built quietly over decades. We started dating and things moved quickly. After 6 months, my husband decided it was time I met his family. He introduced me at their large suburban house as his girlfriend who worked in a support role. My mother-in-law, Linda Evans, looked me over with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes and said it was nice to see him with someone who seemed grounded. My father-in-law, Thomas Evans, shook my hand firmly but stayed mostly quiet. My sister-in-law, Ashley Evans, gave a quick hello and immediately turned the conversation back to her latest shopping trip. My husband laughed and added that I was refreshingly low maintenance compared to his ex, Alexandra Brooks, whose family owned luxury vehicle import lines. His tone had that light sarcasm that made the word sound like a compliment, but landed like a quiet put-down. It was the first time he initiated the comparison right in front of everyone. I kept playing the part I had chosen. Over the next few weeks, my husband brought me around more and more. Each time he would make small comments in front of his family about how I didn't need fancy things, or how my flexible but modest job let me be available whenever he needed me. My mother-in-law would nod along and mention how important it was for a wife to know her place. My sister-in-law would laugh and say I was adorable for not expecting the same lifestyle they had. My husband always started those jabs himself, his voice carrying that sharp edge that made me feel smaller with every gathering. It felt like repeated small violations, each one chipping away at how I saw myself in the relationship. One Saturday afternoon, we were at their house for a casual barbecue. I was helping carry plates when my husband pulled me aside near the grill. "You know my family can be particular," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "They like to see that you're not chasing the business or the money. Just keep being your humble self and everything will be fine." The words were delivered with a smile, but the message was clear: stay in the box I had put you in. Later that evening, while I was inside getting water, I heard his voice from the study. He was on the phone with Alexandra Brooks. "Don't worry about Megan," he said quietly. "She's just a placeholder until we lock in the merger with your family's imports. She thinks we're serious, but she's easy to keep happy. Once the dealerships are safe, we can figure out how to end things without drama." My stomach twisted. My husband was the one driving the whole plan, using me while keeping his ex close for the business deal that would save their chain from the serious debt they had taken on during their last expansion. I stepped back before he saw me and tried to act normal when he came out. "Everything okay?" He asked, that same sharp smile on his face. I nodded, but inside I was reeling. The next morning, I confided in my work friend Jessica Hale over coffee near the office. She knew my real role and salary and had always been someone I could trust with the truth. "Megan, this sounds like he's controlling the narrative on purpose," she said, her voice low. "You need to decide if you want to keep testing him or walk away now." I wasn't ready to walk yet. I needed to understand how deep it went. A few days later, I ran into my husband's golf buddy, Marcus Reed, at the same coffee shop. He had always been friendly to me at family events. He looked around to make sure no one was listening and leaned in. "Look, I don't like getting involved, but Connor has been talking a lot lately about the dealership merger and how Alexandra fits the picture better for business reasons," he whispered. "Be careful with him. He's good at making things sound like they're for the family when it's really about what he wants." It was another piece confirming my husband was the one steering everything. The small violations kept coming. He would cancel our weekend plans last minute to meet Alexandra for business drinks, and then guilt me when I expressed disappointment. "You're always so dramatic about my work," he would say with that cutting sarcasm. "If you really supported me, you wouldn't make it about you." My mother-in-law and sister-in-law would echo the same lines when we were all together, but it always started with something my husband said first. The pressure built slowly but relentlessly. I started noticing how my husband would steer conversations at family dinners to highlight how my simple background made me a safe choice for now. One evening at their house, my sister-in-law mentioned a recent society event, and my husband jumped in with a laugh. "Megan wouldn't feel out of place there, right? She's used to keeping things low-key." His words were light, but the psychological jab was sharp, reminding me of my place in his eyes. I smiled through it, but later that night, I lay awake thinking about how he had slowly taken control of how I presented myself, how I spent my time, even how I talked about my career. It was autonomy slipping away one small violation at a time. The weekend after that, we were supposed to take a short trip, just the two of us, to recharge. At the last minute, my husband announced we had to bring his family because they needed to see I was part of the team. During the drive, he turned to me in front of everyone and said, "Megan, you don't mind if we talk business the whole time, right? Your job is flexible enough that you can just listen and stay supportive." The words landed like another quiet cut. I kept quiet, but the tension was building to a breaking point. Back home after the trip, my husband sat me down on the couch with a serious look. "I think it's time we make this official," he said, pulling out a ring box. But before I could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. A text from Alexandra lit up the screen. He glanced at it, that familiar sharp smile crossing his face for just a second, and I realized the proposal was just another move in his plan to keep me in place until the merger went through. My heart pounded as I stared at the phone. What would happen if I said yes, knowing what I now knew? The air felt thick with the weight of the decision, and I could feel the walls of the life he had been building around me closing in tighter than ever. I sat there staring at the glowing text on his phone, my mind racing with the implications of what I had just seen. Taking a deep breath, I forced a smile and told him yes, I would marry him, even though every instinct screamed that this was the biggest mistake of my life. I needed time to understand just how far his control went, and accepting the proposal seemed like the only way to stay close enough to see the full picture without tipping him off. The next few weeks turned into a masterclass in the kind of slow erosion my husband specialized in. He started every conversation about our future with that familiar sharp edge, framing it as concern but delivering it like a quiet demand. One evening after work, he came home and immediately launched into how my long hours at the office were making it hard for us to plan the wedding properly. If you really cared about building a life together, you would make your schedule more flexible like I do. He said, his voice laced with that sarcastic undertone that always made my chest tighten. Alexandra always put her partner's needs first, without complaint. It was the same pattern, him initiating the comparison to his ex to make me feel inadequate, and I felt the weight of it settle deeper into my bones. I tried to keep things normal at work, but the pressure followed me there too. Jessica Hale, my closest colleague who knew the real scope of my role and salary, noticed the change in me right away during a lunch break in the office break room. She listened as I quietly shared the latest jab from my husband, and her eyes widened. Megan, this isn't love, this is him chipping away at your independence piece by piece. She said, her voice steady but urgent. You have options here. Don't let him rewrite who you are. Her words gave me a flicker of strength, but when I got home that night, my husband was waiting with another escalation. He had canceled our planned date night without asking and announced we were having dinner with his family instead. You don't mind, right? He asked with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My mother and sister want to talk about the wedding, and they expect you to be there supporting us like family should. At that dinner, my mother-in-law brought up how important it was for a wife to prioritize her husband's business interests. My husband jumped in before anyone else could speak, his tone casual but cutting. Megan's job is great for now, but once we're married, she'll see how much easier it would be if she shifted to something less demanding, so she can actually be present for the dealership stuff. My sister-in-law nodded along, but it was always my husband who started the push, turning what should have been a family meal into another reminder that my career was just an inconvenience in his eyes. I sat there smiling through it, filing away every word, but inside, the repeated small violations were starting to feel like a constant low hum of resentment. A couple of days later, Marcus Reed, my husband's golf buddy, who had already given me that quiet warning, pulled me aside at a casual backyard gathering at their house. He glanced around to make sure we were alone near the patio and lowered his voice. Connor's been texting me about the merger timeline with Alexandra's family imports, he said quickly. He's saying the dealerships took on too much debt in the last expansion, and this deal is the only way out. He keeps calling you the easy option until everything is locked in. The confirmation hit like a punch, but I kept my face neutral. Marcus slipped away before my husband noticed, but the knowledge burned in my gut. That night when we got home, my husband initiated yet another conversation, this time about how my stubborn independence was starting to worry him. A real partner would understand when it's time to step back and let the man lead. He said, the psychological jab landing exactly where it hurt most. The weeks blurred into a pattern of these moments. He would text me during important meetings at work, demanding I leave early for family obligations he had arranged without consulting me. When I pushed back, he would sigh and say things like, I thought you were different from the women who put their careers above everything, but maybe I was wrong. Each time it started with him, the sarcasm dripping just enough to make me question myself without giving me clear ground to argue. Jessica noticed the toll it was taking during a late afternoon coffee run near the office. You're fading, Megan, she told me bluntly. This isn't sustainable. You need to start documenting everything in case you decide to walk. I nodded, but I wasn't ready yet. I still believed there might be a version of my husband worth fighting for if I could just prove I wasn't the placeholder he seemed to think I was. Then came the night that pushed everything closer to the breaking point. We were supposed to have a quiet evening at home, but my husband announced at the last minute that Alexandra had called about finalizing some merger details, and he needed to meet her instead. "Don't make this about jealousy," he said when I expressed disappointment, his voice sharp and defensive right from the start. "You're the one I proposed to remember, but if you can't handle supporting my business, then maybe we need to rethink this whole thing." The words hung in the air like a threat, and for the first time, I felt the full force of how he controlled not just my time, but my sense of security in the relationship. I spent that evening alone replaying every jab he had delivered since the proposal, each one initiated by him to keep me off balance. 2 weeks after that, I started noticing physical symptoms from the constant stress. My sleep was fractured, my appetite gone, and simple tasks at work felt overwhelming. Jessica urged me to see a doctor, but I kept putting it off, telling myself I could handle it. My husband, of course, noticed the change and used it as fuel for his next move. During a Sunday brunch with his family, he turned to me in front of everyone and said, "You've been looking exhausted lately, Megan. Maybe it's time you admitted your job is too much and stepped back like I've been suggesting." My mother-in-law and sister-in-law exchanged glances but said nothing. It was him driving the narrative again, framing my fatigue as proof that I was the problem. The following Friday, everything came to a head in a way I never saw coming. I had stayed late at the office to finish a critical project deadline, something my husband knew was important. When I finally got home, he was waiting in the living room with that same calculated smile. "I needed you here tonight for a call with the dealership lawyers." He started his tone already laced with accusation. "But once again, your career came first. If you can't put us ahead of that tech job, then maybe you're not cut out for this marriage after all." The jab cut deeper than usual because I could feel my body giving out from the accumulated stress. My vision blurred slightly as I tried to respond, and the room started to spin. I woke up in the emergency room of Atlanta General Hospital with monitors beeping around me and my husband sitting in the chair beside the bed. The doctor had stepped out for a moment, and in that quiet space, my husband leaned in close, his voice low and controlled. "This fainting episode doesn't look good for us?" He said, the sarcasm gone now and replaced by something colder. "If you don't quit that job and start supporting me properly, the way a wife should, I'll have to tell everyone you're too unstable for a real partnership. We can't have that hanging over the merger talks." His words landed like the final small violation in a long chain of them. And lying there hooked up to machines, I realized the walls he had built around my life had finally closed in completely. But even in that moment, a quiet resolve started forming inside me. I had played along long enough gathering the truth about his control and the way he used me as a placeholder while keeping his ex in the picture for business. The question now was how much longer I could pretend before the cost became more than I was willing to pay, and the uncertainty of what came next hung heavy in the sterile hospital air. My name is Megan Carter. I am 32 years old. 11 months ago, my husband confessed he had been treating me as a temporary distraction, while he kept his ex in the picture to close a major merger for his family's dealership business. Now, in the emergency room of Atlanta General Hospital, after fainting from his constant pressure, my husband leaned in and said quietly that if I didn't quit my job to support him better, he would tell everyone I was too unstable for a real partnership. But lying there, I knew I had to stop letting him dictate my life, or I would lose everything that made me me, and I was ready to fight for my future. If you've ever had your husband use guilt to control your choices and make you feel less, then drop a comment below with what you would do in my shoes or tell me where you're watching from. It really means a lot to hear from all of you. Story continued from previous part. But even in that moment, a quiet resolve started forming inside me. I had played along long enough, gathering the truth about his control and the way he used me as a placeholder while keeping his ex in the picture for business. The question now was how much longer I could pretend before the cost became more than I was willing to pay. And the uncertainty of what came next hung heavy in the sterile hospital air. The doctor returned a few minutes later with discharge papers and a recommendation for rest and stress management. My husband stood up immediately and took the clipboard from her hands before I could reach for it. See, this is exactly what I was talking about. He said, his voice carrying that sharp edge he always used to start these conversations. All this fainting and exhaustion because your job keeps you running around like it's more important than us. Once you quit and focus on being a proper partner, the way I've been asking, none of this will happen again. The doctor glanced between us but said nothing as she left the room. His words landed like another precise cut, framing my health issue as proof that I was the one failing the relationship. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law arrived just as I was buttoning my blouse to leave. They must have gotten the call from him while I was still unconscious. My husband turned to them right away and initiated the same line he had used on me. Mom, Ashley, you should hear this. Megan's doctor basically confirmed what I've been saying for weeks. Her tech job is too demanding and it's making her unstable. I told her she needs to step back completely so she can actually support the family business like a real wife would. My mother-in-law nodded slowly while my sister-in-law gave me a pitying look, but it was always my husband who delivered the first jab and set the tone for everyone else. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the familiar twist in my stomach, yet this time something inside me refused to shrink the way it usually did. On the drive home, he kept the pressure going without pause. This hospital visit is the wake-up call we needed, he said, eyes on the road, but tone laced with that familiar sarcasm. If you cared about our future, you would have listened months ago when I first suggested you make your schedule more flexible for me. Alexandra never let work get in the way of what mattered. The comparison hit exactly as he intended, another small violation stacked on top of all the others. I stared out the window and said nothing, but my mind was already turning over the decision I knew was coming. The next morning, Jessica Hale stopped by my apartment unannounced with coffee and bagels from our usual spot near the office. She had texted me the night before after I sent her a short update from the hospital. Megan, you look like you haven't slept, she said as soon as I opened the door. What did he say this time? I told her everything, including the exact words my husband had used in front of the doctor and his family. Jessica's face tightened. He's not going to stop until you have nothing left of your own. You have to set some real boundaries, or this will keep escalating. Her support felt like the only solid ground I had left, but I still wasn't sure I could follow through on walking away completely. That evening, my husband came home from another meeting with Alexandra and immediately started another conversation in the kitchen while I was loading the dishwasher. I talked to my mother today about the wedding timeline. He began, his voice already carrying that cutting undertone. She agrees that if you don't quit your job soon, it will look like you aren't committed. I need you to make the change by the end of next month so we can move forward without any more of these health scares embarrassing us in front of the dealership partners. The jab was delivered with the same precision he always used, turning my hospital visit into another reason I was the problem. I felt the resolve from the night before harden a little more. Marcus Reed reached out the following afternoon through a quick text asking if we could meet at a quiet park near my office. He had seen my husband at golf earlier and looked uncomfortable when I arrived. Connor is telling everyone the merger's almost locked because Alexandra is on board, he said quietly after we sat on a bench. He's also saying your job is becoming a liability and that once you're out of it, things will be easier for the family image. I don't like how he's framing all of this to make you look like the weak link. Marcus's warning was the last piece I needed. My husband was not only using me as a placeholder, but actively shaping the narrative about me to his entire circle. The final push came 3 days later at a small family gathering my husband had arranged at their house without asking me first. We were barely through the appetizers when he turned to the table and started the conversation exactly the way he always did. Megan had that hospital episode last week because her work stress is out of control, he said, looking straight at his mother and sister. I've been telling her for months she needs to quit and prioritize us, but she keeps resisting. What do you think, Mom? Isn't it time she listened? My mother-in-law agreed immediately, and my sister-in-law added her own comment. But again, it was my husband who initiated the attack and set the entire tone. I sat there listening to the familiar pattern and felt something inside me finally snap into place. That night back at our apartment, I waited until he was in the shower and then quietly packed a single suitcase with only the essentials. When he came out and saw what I was doing, he froze for a second before launching into another jab. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked, his voice sharp right from the start. "You're actually leaving because I want you to support me properly? After everything I've done to include you in the family business plans? If you walk out now, you'll prove I was right about you being too unstable for this." The words were meant to cut deep and keep me in place, but they only confirmed what I already knew. I looked at him for a long moment and said the first clear boundary I had ever set. I'm not quitting my job, and I'm not staying here while you treat me like a temporary distraction. I deserve better than being a placeholder until your merger works out. He tried to interrupt with more sarcasm, but I kept talking calmly. This ends tonight. I'm setting the boundary because I finally see who you really are when you think I'm beneath your notice. My husband stared at me with genuine surprise, as if he had never expected me to push back after all the small violations he had piled on over the months. The next morning, I moved into a small furnished studio apartment on the other side of Atlanta that I had found online the night before. My neighbor, Sarah Klein, a kind woman in her late 40s who worked from home, helped me carry the last box up the stairs and even offered me a cup of tea once everything was inside. "You look like you just made a hard choice," she said gently. I nodded but didn't go into details. Jessica came over later that afternoon with takeout and sat with me on the floor while we ate. "I'm proud of you for finally setting that boundary," she told me. "But I know it's going to feel lonely for a while." She was right. The silence in the new space felt heavier than I expected. Over the following weeks, my husband sent a few texts trying to pull me back in with the same sharp comments he had always used. "You're really going to throw away what we had because you couldn't be flexible." One message read, "My family thinks you're making a huge mistake by putting your career first." Each one started with him initiating the pressure, but I never replied. Marcus Reed checked in once to make sure I was okay and confirmed that the dealership talks with Alexandra were moving forward exactly as my husband had planned. I thanked him and closed that chapter too. The loneliness settled in slowly but completely. Evenings in the studio felt empty without the constant jabs and demands that had become my normal. I kept my job and my routines, but the isolation of choosing myself meant losing the family gatherings, the shared plans, and even the small sense of belonging I had tried to build. My mother in law sent one final message through my husband asking why I had to be so difficult. But again, it was him who forwarded it with his own added line about how I had proven I wasn't cut out for their world. I deleted everything and kept moving forward one quiet day at a time. Looking back now, I understand my grandmother's lesson in a deeper way than I ever had before. A person's true character really does show when they think you have nothing to offer them, and my husband had shown his clearly through every small violation and sharp jab he initiated. I chose to set the boundaries and walk away, but there was no big dramatic victory or satisfying revenge. There was only the quiet reality of self preservation and the loneliness that came with it. I was finally free to live on my own terms, yet the cost was the disconnection from the life I had once tried so hard to fit into. Thank you for listening to my story. It still feels raw to say it out loud, but sharing it here has helped me sit with the loneliness instead of running from it. If you've ever set a firm boundary with someone you loved and ended up feeling more alone than ever, tell me in the comments what that moment taught you. Your stories remind me I'm not the only one who chose herself, even when it hurt.